Hello, my name is Dr. Stephen Tourget. In light of what happened to George Floyd recently and all the protests that we're seeing in response, I wanted to take the time to talk about racism today, and specifically, how do we talk to our children about racism, why should we talk to them, and really, what does it mean for our kids to be expressing certain racial biases at an early age, and how do we intervene with that? Because it really starts with the children and changing them so that they grow up to be race-conscious adults who can be developmentally appropriate and diverse in many ways in their thinking, and to be able to think critically and see people for all that they are rather than just one particular stereotype or color of one's skin. So race is a difficult topic for many to discuss. A lot of adults are uncomfortable with it, so they just don't have the conversation at all. But the problem is that silence reinforces racism. And a lot of people are comfortable talking about gender and the difference between boys and girls early on in preschool. But when it comes to race, they just don't have the conversation at all. But many textbooks for young children also present the issue of racial discrimination as being something that happened in the past, as if it was in our history. But it still goes on today, as we could see with the George Floyd case recently. There's also a myth out there that children don't notice race, that they're colorblind, and that if we talk with them about race, that it's going to somehow indoctrinate them or poison their minds. And that's just not true based on the research. Children can categorize by race, and they do this from a pretty early age. They're more prone to stereotyping, and it's up to us to be able to intervene early and correct certain behaviors and educate them properly. From a developmental lens, let's start with at birth. At birth, babies look equally at faces of all races. It's pretty much the same. They just come out. That's how it is when they come out of the womb. But by 3 months, already babies look more at faces that match the race of their caregivers. And that makes sense. Naturally, you're going to look more towards people that resemble your mother or your father. By 2 years, children use racial categories to reason already about people's behaviors. By 2.5 years, and I found this pretty surprising, by 2.5 years, which is still really young, we see most children use race to choose their playmates on the playground. And then by 3 to 5 years old, numerous studies have shown that children not only categorize people by race, but they also express bias based on that, to either include or exclude other children from certain activities. And then by kindergarten, children show many of the same racial attitudes that we see in adults, and they've already learned to associate some groups with higher statuses than others. And so it's important that we have important conversations with children when we notice that they're expressing certain racial biases, and that we correct that early on. Research shows that simply having specific, straightforward conversations with kids about race, including between the ages of 5 and 7 years old, can make a huge difference within a period of a week in terms of their views towards interracial friendships and all sorts of things. So what should we do as parents, families, caregivers, adults when we're talking with kids? For one, we should take this issue seriously. We should not just brush it off or shush or hush children when they're expressing a racial bias. What we should do is take it seriously and respond to it, and actually explain what race is and go through the differences, and not just allow kids to come up with their own conclusions about race by being silent. They're already coming up with their own conclusions and categorizing based on things. They're using something called transductive reasoning, which is basically a flawed sort of logic in which you connect two things that are not really interrelated. Jean Piaget was a child psychologist that studied this sort of behavior and just different cognitive ways of thinking based on age. And so it's no surprise that a lot of kids are trying to categorize things, but we just have to help them to categorize in the right way and to see people in totality for who they are, rather than distilling it down to a stereotype or a particular color of one's skin. By changing kids and thinking early on, we can really be proactive about race and fight racism and stand united. So, thanks for listening and watching.